My mom's new boyfriend got way too close to me, and no one believed me until it was too late. I never imagined I would sit down and write a confession for strangers, but there's a peculiar honesty that comes when you run out of people willing to hear you. I am a mother first, or at least I always believed I was, and this is the story of how I let the wrong man into our home, how I mistook my own loneliness for love, and how I didn't listen to the only person who needed me to listen most, my daughter, until it was far too late. When my marriage ended, it didn't end with a funeral or a dramatic goodbye. It ended with a soft, humiliating fade-out, a drawer emptied a little more each week, a toothbrush gone, an apology that didn't apologize. He left, and the world didn't collapse or burn. It just kept going as if I were supposed to keep up and pretend it didn't hurt. I learned how to budget in colors on a spreadsheet and how to unclog a sink with YouTube tutorials. I learned that quiet can be both a sanctuary and a punishment. I learned to tell myself that being enough for my daughter would also be enough for me. And for a while, it was. Then the house grew older with us, and my daughter grew into her own life, a life with friends and exams and laughter that didn't need me in every corner of it. I loved that for her. I also resented the empty seats she left behind. I didn't resent her, just the way the silence seemed to float toward me after she closed her door. That silence had a way of whispering questions at night. What if this is it? What if the rest of your life looks exactly like this? It is hard to admit this out loud, but I started wanting to be seen as a woman again, not only as a mother who could fix a science project and find lost keys and stretch a paycheck past its breaking point. Daniel arrived as if I'd ordered him out of that silence. He came through a colleague I barely knew, someone's barbecue where paper plates bowed under too much potato salad, and the kids played a game that sounded like laughter and shrieks. He wasn't striking, not in the way that pulls a room toward him. He was warm. He looked me in the eyes when we spoke. He asked questions as if he wanted the answers. He made a dull joke about sprinklers that shouldn't have been funny, and I laughed harder than I had in months. It felt like a window sliding open. It felt like I could breathe. He started with practical kindnesses. "Let me take a look at that sticking door," he said, and he brought a tool bag with neat rows of screwdrivers like soldiers. He replaced the chirping smoke alarm battery at midnight without a sigh. He texted to ask if we needed anything from the store and always remembered the brand I liked. He cooked once, just spaghetti and a Jared sauce with a handful of basil torn over the top, but he set the table like it mattered, napkins folded, glasses filled, candles lit as if the ordinary deserved ceremony. My daughter sat across from him, twirling pasta the way she twirled hair around her finger when she was little. She was polite, my girl has manners, but watchful, wary. I mistook that watchfulness for protectiveness. I placed my palm over hers and squeezed, and hoped she could feel how my chest was unclenching for the first time in years. I hoped she'd be relieved that I wasn't carrying everything alone. The first time she spoke up, she did it carefully. After he'd gone, she hovered in the doorway of my room and said, "Mom, he's a lot." She tried to smile. "Maybe just slow down?" I told her there wasn't anything to slow down, that it was nice to have someone fix a hinge without paying a handyman. She said, "Can it be just us tonight?" And I said, "Of course," and it was, and we watched a show and ate ice cream, and I let myself believe I had found a balance, my girl and me, and a little borrowed warmth on the side. But the next time Daniel came over, he brought two small gifts, one for me, a candle that smelled like oranges and cloves, and one for her, a signed paperback from a writer she loved. The signature was real. He got it through a friend. It was thoughtful and precise in the way that felt like listening, and I saw my daughter's face soften for a second before it tightened again. "You didn't have to," she said. "I wanted to," he answered. Later, she told me it felt like he was buying a vote. I told myself she was being cynical, told myself she'd grown used to it being the two of us, told myself she just needed time. Time made me softer toward him and harder toward her without my noticing. He drove us to the market one Saturday and bought ingredients I wouldn't splurge on: real Parmesan, good olive oil, and at checkout he caught my hand before I could pull out the card and said, "Let me." I had forgotten what it was like not to be the only one counting. He noticed the ache in my neck from sleeping wrong and set his thumbs into the muscles with just enough pressure that I sighed before I could stop myself. He remembered stories I'd told him and asked about them weeks later. He made me feel like a woman someone could choose, not a mother someone had to rely on. The first wrong thing was small enough to dismiss. I came home early and found him in the kitchen with my daughter. He was leaning against the counter too close, laughing at something that didn't sound funny. She stood with her arms folded, shoulders sloped the way girls slope them when they want to disappear. He didn't touch her. He didn't have to. The space around them was wrong. Somehow, something in the angle of his attention, how he took up the doorway with his body when I stepped in, how she slipped past him quickly and said she had homework. I told myself I was imagining it. I told myself the story mothers tell so they can sleep. He's trying too hard to connect. The second wrong thing was impossible to ignore, and yet I ignored it. She came to me, cheeks blooming pink with embarrassment, and said, "He moved my hair. Like this." She showed me fingers skimming the back of her neck, sweeping a strand from collar to shoulder. I told him not to. Her voice was very steady, which is how I knew she was afraid. Fear has a way of making my daughter unbearably precise. I felt something bloom in my chest then, anger, protective and sharp, and I told her I'd talk to him. But by the time he came over that night, he had dinner and a story and a small kindness in his pocket, and the moment slid away from me. I told myself I'd misread. I told myself maybe he was clumsy with boundaries. I told myself so many things I wish I could unsay. He apologized later without admitting anything. "I get it," he said when I hinted around it. "She's your girl. I would never do anything to hurt her. I don't always know where the lines are. I didn't grow up with sisters." It was the kind of apology that asks to be forgiven for a misunderstanding, and I handed him that forgiveness because it was easier than sitting with the cold stone of doubt in my lap. He brought my daughter a new set of pencils before her exams and said, "You're going to crush it," and when she refused to take them, I scolded her for being ungracious. Afterward, alone in the bathroom, I stared at myself in the mirror and said out loud, "You're not choosing him over her." The mirror didn't answer back. He started suggesting little adjustments. "She's got a lot on her plate," he'd say. "Maybe she doesn't need to work weekends at the cafe. Kids get burned out." I had been worried about the same thing and felt grateful for the solidarity. "She's up late texting," he'd notice. "You should set a curfew for her phone. Sleep matters." He was right about sleep. He was right enough, often enough, that I didn't notice when he became the one I checked with before I made decisions. It was subtle, like turning the dimmer switch down in a room. You don't realize you're sitting in the dark until your eyes adjust to the lack of light. The first time my daughter accused me of not listening, it was after one of those little adjustments. "He doesn't get to drive me," she said, arms crossed over a backpack strap. "I don't want him to." He had offered, insisted, really, because I was working a double. "It's just a ride," I said, "and it saves me leaving early." She shook her head. "He makes comments," she said. "Like what?" I demanded, ready to believe anything that would let me file this as a misunderstanding. "About my clothes. About how I've grown up this year." She looked at the floor, and I felt a lurch that I covered with a sigh. "He's awkward," I said. "He's trying. You could meet him halfway." I hate myself for that sentence. He grew bolder because I kept opening the door. The touches became quick, deniable, a palm on a shoulder blade, a brush along an elbow as he stepped past, a hand at the small of her back to steer her toward a doorway. I saw some of them. I saw and did nothing. That is a sentence I have to practice saying, or else I drown in the word nothing. Everyone loved him. That made it worse. He was nice to the neighbors and brought in their trash bins without being asked. He remembered birthdays. He knew the barista's name. If you'd asked anyone about him, they would have said he was a good man. That is what made me suspicious of my own daughter instead of suspicious of him, this composite character built from other people's approval. When she said, "Mom, please," I heard, "You're trying to ruin the one good thing I have." I heard the fear of being alone again and mistook it for the truth. The fight that changed our house started small. He had teased her in the kitchen, a joke about something she'd spilled. The joke wasn't cruel, but it was intimate, like something you say to someone you've watched for a long time and cataloged small embarrassments. She told him to knock it off. He put his hands up, smiling. "Relax," he said. "It's just a joke." She took the dish towel and threw it toward the sink. It missed and hit the floor. "Pick that up," I said, too sharply, and she stared at me as if I were a stranger. "You used to defend me," she whispered. "From what?" I asked, as if the question were honest. She went up to her room, steps like punctuation on the stairs. He touched my wrist. "Teenagers," he murmured. "You're doing great." I let that praise float me like a raft. It wasn't one moment after that, it was 100. A shirt she wouldn't wear because he had commented on it once, casually, as if he didn't mean anything by it. A door he didn't knock on before opening. A text he sent me about how proud he was of her after an exam, followed by the language of a coach, push, push, keep her focused, language that made me grateful he cared and made her feel like an object on a schedule. She began to shrink in her own home, less laughter, more closed doors. When she did laugh, it sounded like an apology. One night, she came to the living room and turned off the television while I was still holding the remote. "I need you to listen," she said. Her voice was steady again, that terrible steadiness. "You always say you'll listen later. I need you to listen now." She told me about the time he had stood too close in the hallway, and she had pressed herself back against the wall because she couldn't pass. She told me about the time he'd commented on a photo one of her friends posted, a comment that sounded fatherly to me and like a measured appraisal to her. She told me she had started taking the long way home to avoid arriving when she knew he might be there alone. She asked me to set a boundary I had been postponing out of convenience. "I don't want him here when I'm here alone." I wanted to promise it without hesitation. I wanted to be the mother who stood up so quickly there wasn't room for her to doubt it. But I heard myself say, "That's not always possible," and watched the belief leave her face. She nodded as if I'd told her the weather forecast. She went to her room and shut the door gently, and somehow the gentleness hurt more than the slam. He noticed the distance and changed tactics. He started worrying out loud about her friend group, about a boy he'd seen her with, about grades that were good but could be better if she were more disciplined. He cast himself as my ally, us against the chaos of adolescence. He said things like, "You're a great mom. I want to back you up." He said, "She's testing boundaries. We should be consistent." Though we should have set off all the alarms in my body. Instead, I inhaled the comfort of it. It is intoxicating, the feeling of not shouldering a decision alone. Eventually, the fighting became the language of our evenings. Not constant war, more the kind of ongoing cold weather you dress for. She tried different tactics: open pleading, sarcasm, silence. I tried my own: reason, guilt, rules. He stayed reasonable when I couldn't, which made me believe he was helping. My daughter's eyes told me otherwise. They told me I was losing her. I refused to translate them. The night she finally screamed at me, it wasn't because of something huge. I had asked her to text me when she got to her friend's house. She did. Daniel asked, "Which friend?" I answered. Later, she came home early, cheeks raw from the wind or maybe from crying. He had asked a follow-up question about the boy who'd been there, framed as concern. She stomped upstairs. I followed. She turned in her doorway and said, "You used to have my back. Now you have a committee." She gestured toward the living room where he's Saturday. "You don't even notice what he's doing. You don't want to." "I'm trying to keep you safe," I said, and even as I said it, I heard the hollow in the middle. "From what?" she asked. "From the only person in this house who sees what's happening?" "You're exaggerating," I said, because it was easier than saying, "I am afraid." "I am afraid you're right." She stared at me for a long moment, then said in a voice so calm it frightened me, "You're choosing him over me." She closed the door quietly. I stood there with my hand on the frame, and on the other side I imagined her pulling her knees to her chest and being small in a way I had promised she wouldn't have to be in this world. I wish I could say that was the moment I woke up. It wasn't. I wish I could say the next morning I told him to leave and that I flushed his careful kindnesses out of my house like smoke. I didn't. I went to work. I answered emails. I made dinner. I let him kiss my forehead by the sink. I told myself I was keeping the peace while I figured out what to do, and then I didn't figure it out. Denial isn't a single decision. It's 1,000 tiny ones that feel reasonable in the moment. But even denial has a weight limit. It started to groan under me when I caught him looking at her reflection in the microwave door. She was taking a plate out and he was behind her, just far enough that there was nothing to scold, just close enough that I could see his eyes in the warped chrome surface, lingering in a way that didn't belong to a man who wanted to be a father figure. My stomach tilted. He turned and asked if I wanted tea. I said yes to cover the feeling of falling. I began to inventory things after that, moments, phrases, patterns, as if counting them might turn them into facts. Facts I would have to face. I started standing in doorways and watching how he moved around her, whether he made space. I started listening to the tone he used when it was just the two of them in a room and I was a step away. I started noticing how many of my sentences began with, "he didn't mean," and how often hers ended with, "please." The day I finally told him there had to be a rule, no being at the house with her unless I was home, he smiled, slow and patient, and said, "Of course." His eyes, though, flicked to the staircase as if calculating angles. I told myself I had fixed something. I told myself it would be enough. I told myself a mother's rules could make a bad feeling into a manageable one. I was wrong.